If you relive conversations long after they've ended, not just remembering what was said, but re-entering the moment emotionally, feeling the same tension or warmth in your body, there's a reason for that. Not because you're stuck in the past, not because you can't move on, and not because you're emotionally fragile. Psychology suggests something far more specific is happening in your mind. Because reliving a conversation is not the same as remembering it. Most people recall conversations as summaries. You relive them as experiences. You remember where you were sitting, the look on their face when they paused, the exact moment something shifted, even if no one said it out loud. And long after the interaction ends, your nervous system hasn't fully left the scene. You may have been told this means you're dwelling, that you should let it go, that you're holding on to things too much. But psychology tells a very different story. Reliving conversations isn't random. It isn't a flaw, and it isn't something everyone does. In this video, you'll learn the 7 psychological traits most commonly found in people who relive conversations. If you tend to relive emotionally charged interactions, this will help you understand why your mind re-enters past moments so vividly, what your brain is actually searching for, and why this pattern developed in the first place. Before we continue, if you're drawn to calm, emotionally intelligent, and genuinely practical psychology-based guidance, please subscribe to Emotional Growth. Now, let's begin with the first trait, because once you recognize this one, you'll start to understand why certain conversations don't simply fade. They stay alive inside your system. If you relive past conversations, the first psychological trait you likely have is this. You don't process conversations as simple information. You process them as lived experiences. For most people, a conversation becomes a memory fairly quickly. Their brain compresses it into a summary. What was decided, what was agreed on, what generally happened, and then moves on. Your mind works differently. When you leave a conversation, your brain doesn't just store what was said. It stores what it felt like to be inside the interaction. The emotional tone, the physical sensations, the subtle shifts in energy, the moment something felt slightly off or unexpectedly meaningful. This is known in psychology as experiential memory processing. It means your brain encodes social interactions, not as detached facts, but as embodied experiences. So when you relive a conversation, you're not going back on purpose. Your nervous system is re-entering an experience that was never fully integrated. Let me explain what that means. During emotionally relevant interactions, your brain and body work together. Your sensory system, emotional system, and memory centers are all active at the same time. If the interaction feels clear and emotionally complete, the brain closes the loop. But if something feels unresolved, ambiguous, emotionally charged, or internally conflicting, your system keeps the experience open. That's when reliving happens. Not as a choice, not as rumination, but as unfinished processing. You may notice this in very specific ways. You don't just remember what they said. You remember how you felt when they said it. You might feel the same tightness in your chest, the same drop in your stomach, the same warmth or disappointment wash over you again. Sometimes it happens hours later, sometimes days later, sometimes in quiet moments when your mind finally has space. This doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. It means your system is still carrying an experience that hasn't been fully resolved. And here's something important to understand. People with experiential memory processing often don't get closure from surface explanations. Being told, it wasn't a big deal, or they probably didn't mean anything by it, rarely settles the body, because your body remembers the experience, not the explanation. That's why you might logically understand a situation and still feel emotionally unsettled. Your mind may be ready to move on, but your nervous system hasn't finished processing yet. And for many people, this trait didn't develop randomly. It often forms in environments where emotional meaning mattered more than spoken words, where you had to feel your way through interactions, where tone mattered, where what was unsaid carried weight, where understanding the emotional undercurrent was necessary to stay connected or safe. Over time, the brain adapts. Through neuroplasticity, it strengthens the pathways that link emotion, memory, and bodily sensation. It learns to store experiences deeply, because depth once provided clarity. Now, even in conversations that appear ordinary, Your system still records them in high resolution. That's why certain moments linger. A look, a pause, a sentence that didn't land the way it should have. Your brain isn't holding on to the past to punish you. It's holding on to an experience, because it believes there's still meaning inside it. And while this depth can feel heavy at times, it's also what allows you to connect profoundly. You don't skim interactions. You inhabit them. You feel them fully. You register nuance. You carry emotional truth in a way many people never do. That's not a weakness. It's a form of psychological depth. But this depth also creates something else. Because when experiences are stored so vividly, they don't fade easily. And that leads us directly to the second trait. Because for people who relive conversations, it's never just about memory. It's also about emotion. If you relive past conversations, the second psychological trait you likely have is this. Your emotional system continues processing long after the interaction ends. For many people, emotions rise and fall quickly. A conversation happens, a feeling appears, and then it fades. For you, emotions move differently. When a conversation carries emotional weight, even subtly, your nervous system doesn't immediately release it. The feeling lingers, not because you're dramatic, not because you're clinging to the moment, but because your emotional system processes experiences to completion, not to convenience. Psychology refers to this as emotional residue processing. It means that emotional information doesn't disappear just because the conversation is over. It stays present until your system understands what it meant and what it implies. You may notice this in your body before you notice it in your thoughts. A tight chest that doesn't fully relax. A low-level unease you can't quite explain. A heaviness that shows up hours later when you're finally alone. A warmth or closeness that stays with you longer than expected. This isn't imagination. It's physiology. When an interaction carries uncertainty, rejection, or mixed signals, your body releases stress hormones like cortisol. Your system stays alert. When an interaction carries safety, validation, or emotional closeness, chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine are released, creating bonding and emotional imprinting. But when signals are inconsistent, when words sound kind but the tone feels distant, when agreement is verbal but emotional alignment feels unclear, your nervous system doesn't get closure. And without closure, it keeps returning to the experience. That return is what feels like reliving. You might replay the conversation not to analyze it, but because your body still hasn't settled. Let me ask you something, and see if this feels familiar. Have you ever told yourself, it wasn't a big deal, and still felt unsettled? Have you ever understood a situation logically, yet your body reacted as if something was unresolved? Have you ever relived a conversation, not because you wanted answers, but because the feeling wouldn't leave? That's emotional residue. People with this trait don't shake things off easily, not because they're fragile, but because their emotional system is finely tuned. It registers emotional nuance with depth. It notices when something doesn't fully land, when connection feels partial, when closure is implied but not embodied. And because your system values emotional accuracy, it won't release an experience until it feels internally complete. This depth can feel exhausting. You may wonder why others seem unaffected, while you're still carrying the emotional tone of the interaction. Why a small comment lingers. Why a subtle shift stays with you. But here's what's rarely acknowledged. This same trait is the foundation of empathy. It's what allows you to feel into others, to sense when someone is holding back, to recognize emotional truth beneath polite language, to connect in ways that feel real, not performative. Your emotional system isn't slow. It's thorough. And when emotional residue combines with experiential memory, reliving becomes inevitable, not as a flaw, but as a natural consequence of depth. However, this emotional depth doesn't exist in isolation. Because when your system keeps emotional information active, your mind begins asking another question. What does this mean going forward? And that brings us directly to the third trait. If you relive past conversations, the third psychological trait you likely have is this. Your mind is constantly mapping patterns to predict what comes next. When you relive a conversation, you're not just revisiting the past, you're scanning it for information about the future. Your brain begins asking quiet, automatic questions, often without you consciously choosing to. What did that reaction signal? Did something shift in the dynamic? Was there a subtle change in tone or energy? What does this interaction suggest about what's coming next? Psychology refers to this as predictive pattern mapping. It's a cognitive process driven by the brain's need to reduce uncertainty. The human mind is wired to anticipate, but for some people, this function operates at a much higher resolution. Clear outcomes are easy to process. Direct disagreement is easier than vague politeness. A firm boundary is less stressful than emotional ambiguity. But when a conversation ends without clarity, when meaning feels incomplete, your brain stays active. It returns to the interaction, comparing it to previous experiences, searching for familiar patterns, flagging anything that doesn't quite fit. You may notice this as a sense of unease rather than a clear thought. A feeling that something changed, even if no one acknowledged it. A subtle awareness that the emotional temperature shifted. A quiet intuition that the interaction carried implications beyond the words. This doesn't mean you're imagining things. It means your brain is running internal simulations, trying to understand the trajectory of the relationship. Before anything becomes explicit, this trait often develops in environments where anticipating others' reactions mattered, where emotional dynamics weren't always stable, where moods could shift quickly, where noticing early signs helped you stay connected or protected. In those conditions, the brain adapts. Through neuroplasticity, it strengthens pathways that support anticipation and pattern detection. It learns to read between the lines, to notice changes before they're spoken, to prepare before things escalate. Over time, this becomes automatic. Even now, your mind may replay a brief exchange, not because anything overt went wrong, but because something didn't align with an internal pattern. Have you ever sensed distance in someone before they admitted anything had changed? Have you ever been told, "You're reading too much into it," only to later realize you were right? That's not coincidence. Your brain has been quietly collecting data others overlook, and while this constant predictive processing can feel mentally tiring, it also makes you perceptive, prepared, and rarely blindsided. You tend to notice relational shifts early. You sense instability before it becomes obvious. You recognize patterns before others are ready to name them. You're not overthinking. You're forecasting. But here's where it becomes more personal. Because if your brain is constantly scanning interactions for meaning, that same analytical lens eventually turns inward. Which brings us directly to the fourth trait. If you relive past conversations, the fourth psychological trait you likely have is this. You possess an unusually high level of self-monitoring and inner reflection. You don't only relive what others said, you relive how you showed up. Your words, your tone, your timing, what you expressed clearly, and what you held back. This is known in psychology as metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts, reactions, and behavior, while reflecting on their impact. And this ability is far less common than most people realize. Many people move through conversations reactively. They respond in the moment, say what feels necessary, and then let the interaction fade. You don't. After an interaction ends, your mind naturally turns inward. You begin reviewing the exchange, not to judge yourself, but to understand it. You may ask yourself, did I communicate what I actually meant? Did I minimize myself to avoid discomfort? Did I miss an opportunity to clarify or set a boundary? Did I come across the way I intended to? This level of reflection can feel heavy. At times, it may feel like your mind never fully rests after social interactions. Like the conversation continues internally, even when you're alone. But at its core, this trait doesn't come from insecurity. It comes from care. You care about clarity. You care about integrity. You care about showing up in ways that feel honest and aligned. Psychology consistently links this kind of reflective capacity to emotional intelligence, adaptability, and long-term growth. People with strong metacognitive awareness don't repeat the same relational patterns blindly. They notice them. They question them. They refine how they show up over time. However, there's an important line here, and many people who relive conversations cross it without realizing. Reflection supports growth. Self-surveillance creates suffering. When reflection is paired with curiosity, it leads to insight. But when reflection is paired with a nervous system that doesn't feel safe, it can turn into self-criticism. Instead of asking, what can I learn from this? The inner dialogue shifts to, what did I do wrong? Instead of integrating the experience, your mind begins scanning for mistakes, and when stress hormones are elevated, the brain loses access to perspective. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for learning and regulation, gets overridden by the threat response. Self-awareness turns into self-attack. So let me ask you something important. When you relive conversations, do you feel clearer afterward? Or smaller? Do you gain understanding? Or tension in your body? That distinction matters. Your capacity for reflection is not the problem. It's a strength. It allows you to grow consciously, to adjust intentionally, to become emotionally mature rather than reactive. But it needs to be paired with self-compassion, with a nervous system that feels safe enough to reflect without fear. You're not reliving conversations because you're defective. You're reliving them because you hold yourself to a high internal standard, and because you genuinely care about your impact on others. And beneath this reflective mind, there's something even more fundamental at work. Because for many people, reliving conversations isn't just cognitive or emotional, it's physiological. Which brings us directly to the fifth trait. If you relive past conversations, the fifth psychological trait you likely have is this. Your nervous system operates in a state of heightened vigilance. This doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means your body learned to stay alert. Psychology refers to this pattern as hypervigilance, a condition in which the nervous system continuously scans for potential threat, even in situations that are objectively safe. For many people who relive conversations, this vigilance didn't appear out of nowhere. It developed as an adaptive response. If you spent time in environments where emotional signals were unpredictable, where approval could suddenly turn into withdrawal, where affection felt conditional, or where you had to carefully monitor others' moods to stay emotionally safe, your nervous system adjusted. It learned that attention reduced risk, that anticipation prevented harm, that staying alert preserved connection. Over time, this adaptation became automatic. Your limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotional survival, became highly sensitive to shifts in tone, expression, and emotional availability. So now, when a conversation feels even slightly off, your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your breath becomes shallow, and almost immediately, your brain begins reliving the interaction. Not because you're weak, not because you're overly anxious by nature, but because your nervous system is asking one fundamental question. Am I safe here? This is why reliving often focuses on what might have gone wrong, why your mind scans for signs of rejection, why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable. This pattern isn't a personality flaw, it's a psychobiological response. When stress hormones like cortisol remain elevated, the nervous system stays alert. The brain seeks certainty. Reliving conversations becomes a way to regain a sense of safety. And here's something important to understand. This response once protected you. It helped you navigate environments where emotional safety wasn't guaranteed. It helped you stay attuned, adaptable, and responsive. But patterns that protect us early in life can become burdens later on, because the nervous system doesn't automatically update itself. It doesn't know on its own that you may be safer now. It requires new experiences and conscious reassurance to learn that it no longer needs to stay on high alert. So let me ask you something, and notice what comes up without judging it. Do you relive conversations more when you're already tired or emotionally drained? More after interactions where you didn't feel fully seen or understood? More with people whose approval matters deeply to you? That's not coincidence. That's your nervous system responding to perceived vulnerability. And here's the most important reframe of all. You're not reliving conversations because you're broken. You're reliving them because, at some point, your system learned that vigilance equaled safety. That adaptation helped you survive. And now, with awareness, it can begin to soften. Because understanding this brings us to the sixth trait, the one that explains why certain words and moments stay so vivid in your mind long after the conversation ends. If you relive past conversations, the sixth psychological trait you likely have is this. You have an unusually vivid memory for emotionally charged language. You don't just remember the idea of what was said. You remember the words themselves, the phrasing, the emphasis, the pause before a sentence, the moment a tone softened or sharpened. For most people, Memory compresses conversations quickly. Their brain keeps the general meaning and discards the details. Yours doesn't. Psychology refers to this as enhanced verbal, emotional encoding. It means that when language carries emotional significance, your brain stores it with precision. Because words are not neutral to you. Words carry intention. Words signal closeness or distance. Words shape meaning. So when someone says something that feels loaded, supportive, dismissive, ambiguous, or emotionally charged, your mind records it carefully, not to dwell on it, but to understand it. You may notice this trait in very specific ways. A sentence someone said weeks ago can resurface with surprising clarity. A single phrase can echo long after the interaction has ended. Sometimes you wish your mind would let it fade, but it doesn't. Not because you're clinging to the moment, but because your brain hasn't finished extracting meaning from it yet. People with this kind of memory often notice inconsistencies over time. You remember promises others forget they made. You recall shifts in how someone speaks to you. You sense when emotional availability changes. Before it becomes obvious, this can be a gift. It gives you deep relational insight. It allows you to track emotional truth across time. It helps you understand people beyond surface impressions. But it can also be heavy, because words that matter to you don't dissolve easily. A careless sentence can linger. A dismissive tone can stay with you. A moment of emotional distance can feel frozen in time. Not because you're obsessing, but because your system is still processing the meaning behind it. Let me ask you something gently. Have you ever wished you could forget a specific sentence someone said to you? Have you ever wondered why your mind holds onto words so clearly when others seem to move on? That doesn't mean your memory is malfunctioning. It means it's highly attuned. Research consistently shows that people with strong verbal, emotional memory often excel in communication, writing, teaching, mediation, and relational insight. Your brain is wired to extract meaning through language. So when a conversation feels unfinished, your mind keeps returning to it, not to hurt you, but to place it correctly, to integrate it, to understand what it revealed. And when this trait combines with everything you've heard so far, experiential memory, emotional residue, pattern mapping, deep self-reflection, and a vigilant nervous system, it becomes clear why conversations don't simply fade for you. Your system captures more data than most, but there's one final piece to understand. Because the question isn't why you relive conversations anymore. The question is, what happens when all of these traits operate together? And that brings us to the seventh and final trait. If you relive past conversations, the seventh psychological trait you likely have is this. Your mind is fundamentally oriented toward meaning. You don't just experience interactions. You don't just feel them. You don't just analyze them. You try to integrate them. For many people, conversations are events. They happen, they pass, and they dissolve into the background of daily life. For you, conversations are signals. They carry information about connection, about trust, about safety, about where you stand with someone who matters. Psychology describes this as meaning-oriented integration, a tendency to organize experiences into coherent narratives that help the mind understand relationships and self-identity over time. When you relive a conversation, your brain isn't stuck looping randomly. It's trying to answer deeper questions. What does this interaction say about the relationship? What does it reveal about how I'm seen? What changed here? What stayed the same? What does this mean for who I am in this connection? This trait is especially strong in people who value emotional truth over emotional comfort. You don't just want things to feel fine. You want them to make sense. So when a conversation feels emotionally inconsistent, when words and behavior don't align, when something meaningful is hinted at but not acknowledged, your system keeps the experience active, because unresolved meaning creates internal tension. Your mind doesn't want endless analysis. It wants coherence. And for people with this trait, coherence isn't intellectual. It's emotional. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the felt sense of this fits or this doesn't. This orientation toward meaning often develops in people who had to make sense of complex emotional environments early in life, where clarity wasn't always given, where explanations were incomplete, where emotional truth had to be inferred rather than stated. In those contexts, the mind learns to connect dots, to integrate experiences, to build internal narratives that restore order and understanding. Over time, this becomes part of how you relate to the world. You don't dismiss experiences easily. You don't gloss over emotional data. You don't forget interactions that altered how something felt. You carry them until they settle into understanding. This is not a flaw. It's the foundation of wisdom. People with meaning-oriented minds often become the ones who understand others deeply, who see patterns across time, who offer perspective, insight, and emotional clarity when others feel confused. But this trait also explains why reliving can turn painful. Because when meaning is missing, the mind keeps searching, not to punish you, but to complete the story. And here's the most important shift of all. You don't relive conversations because you're unable to move forward. You relive them because your mind refuses to move forward without understanding. And when understanding finally arrives, when the experience is integrated, the reliving softens, not because you forced it to stop, but because your system no longer needs to hold on to it. The real question is, how do you work with this depth? Instead of turning it against yourself, if you relive past conversations, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your mind operates with depth. You register experiences fully. You feel emotional nuance precisely. You reflect carefully. You seek meaning honestly. These qualities didn't appear by accident. They developed because, at some point in your life, they helped you adapt. They helped you understand people. They helped you protect yourself emotionally. They helped you stay connected in environments where clarity wasn't always available. Your brain learned to store experiences vividly. Your nervous system learned to stay alert. Your memory learned to hold on to language. Your mind learned to search for patterns and meaning. And now, even when you no longer need to operate this way all the time, these traits are still part of how you experience the world. The goal is not to stop reliving conversations completely. The goal is to understand why your system does it, and to decide when the reliving is helping and when it's hurting. So here's a simple reset you can use. The next time you notice yourself reliving a conversation, pause for a moment and ask, am I reliving this to gain understanding, or because my body doesn't feel safe yet? If the answer is understanding, you can choose a grounded action. Maybe it's writing down one insight and letting it rest. Maybe it's planning a calm, honest conversation. Maybe it's simply acknowledging what you learned. If the answer is safety, analysis won't help. Your nervous system needs reassurance, not more thinking. That might mean slowing your breath, placing a hand on your chest, feeling your feet on the ground, reminding yourself that you are not in danger right now. When the body settles, the mind follows. This is how new neural pathways form, not by forcing yourself to stop reliving, not by judging your depth, but by teaching your system that it no longer needs to stay on high alert. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to stop caring. You don't need to erase your sensitivity. You just need to stop turning your depth into self-punishment. So the next time a conversation comes back to you, try this instead. Acknowledge the intelligence behind the behavior. Thank your mind for trying to protect you. Then decide consciously whether this moment deserves more energy or whether it's time to let it pass. You are not stuck in the past. You are processing deeply. And depth, when paired with compassion, becomes wisdom. Before you go, if this video helped you understand yourself a little better, please subscribe to Emotional Growth. This channel is for people who feel deeply, think carefully, and want clarity, not labels. And if this video made you realize that your nervous system may have been in survival mode longer than you thought, and you're ready to build inner stability without becoming emotionally closed off, I've created a practical guide to emotional self-regulation. To support you, it's designed to help you calm your nervous system, reduce emotional exhaustion, and relate to your depth in healthier ways, step by step at your own pace. You'll find the guide in the first pinned comment below. Thank you for being here.